Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of New Mexico Commissioner of Public Lands, Stephanie Garcia Richard, I want to thank once again our partners at the Healthy Soil Working Group for promoting sustainable agriculture and inviting us to work with them. I also want to welcome State Trust Land agricultural lessees, those who are participating today. You are valuable partners to the land office. We couldn't manage 9 million acres without your help. And when you have access to information that helps in your stewardship, everyone in New Mexico benefits. Last, I want to thank Gregg Simonds for taking the time today to share his expertise and experience. And we look forward to your presentation and appreciate your time.
So I just wanted to briefly, my name is Rob Hirsch, and I'm one of the co-founders of the Healthy Soil Working Group. And I just very briefly want to introduce Gregg Simonds. We're very thankful to have Gregg with us today. And Gregg is going to discuss the value of soil health and rangeland management. And, you know, he brings a deeper value of the importance of humans and the land and the stewardship that's involved with that. He went to school in Utah. He got a focus on ranching management. And since the 1970s, he's been a consultant for ranching and ranch stewardship. And so he has a wealth of expertise and experience. He's also very experienced with giving back to the greater good, and he's donating his time today to speak with us, and we're very grateful for his being here. He was, along with his team, they were just awarded an honor from the Department of Interior, from the US Department of Interior, for maintaining healthy and viable locally managed rangelands and being exceptional stewards of the land, and for reducing fire risk, and for supporting native perennial grasses, as well as resiliency with water, and generally speaking, a directive towards partnership. So one of Gregg's emphasis is the importance of cover versus bare ground, and the importance of course, water security. He's also developed extensive resources to do with modeling of the land, and now to do with measuring of the land and the value of healthy soil principles. So again, it gives us great delight to introduce and have Gregg Simonds with us today.
All right, thank you. Do you want me to go now?
Yes, please.
Okay, well, thanks everybody. Let me amend part of the introduction is not only have I been a consultant, but I've mostly been a ranch manager since 1975 and have run small places that I own to very large places. I currently lease 400,000 acres in Nevada and 60,000 acres in California, where we operate about 2,500 cows and 5,000 yearlings. So it's not only, I understand profitability and make it get along, and was a regional head for the Mormon Church of Farm Management in the Western United States. And so these things have been applied, driven by profitability. And so my mission statement in 1973 I wrote was, I want to be a positive resource management example, i.e. make money while improving the land. And back at that time, that sounded like heresy, either to the ecology movement or to the ranch movement. But anyhow, one thing that we've done over the years, the way that we've been able to meet that mission statement has been to find good people that are happy, curious, and like to work, and then also to give them good information from financial to biological. The thing that was always lacking was having really good information that you could trust about what you were doing to your landscape. And because that's the biggest item on your balance sheet, if you're a rancher, we actually have the worst information on it. And so we were never able to evaluate really well, other than kind of gee whiz stuff on what was going on with the land. And so since 1983, when I was introduced to remote sensing, I finally realized that we would have a way to be able to look at everything through time of important functional groups. So because of the not having a statistically valid or economically feasible way to know land conditions, and then trying to get large groups to start using remote sensing and not getting anywhere with it, I decided to form my own company to do it, because I feel like if you have good people and good feedback, then you can have trusted communication, minimize your bias, and then find solutions or be able to overcome your faults. And so, and learn from when you do fail and keep moving up this virtuous progress of trying to be a better and better land steward. So we formed Open Range Consulting, Eric Sant, the GIS specialist, and me, the manager. And we are small. There's 6 employees. We're based in Utah and Idaho, and we've been formally looking at how can we manage this gift called landscapes for over 20 years. And so anyhow, part of it, the beginning of it, was thinking, man, I've really been able to do stuff with cattle and with wildlife and other things, but never been able to capitalize on the value and the health as we changed our landscapes and directly. And so even though, like at Desert Land and Livestock, we changed the number of neotropic birds that we saw from 84 to 137 seen in one day, those birds were indicator of a change in land health. And so anyhow, we formed this company, and we've created a suite of technologies that we call EarthSense technology. So basically what we've done, this shows some of the places we've worked. We've done about 50 million acres now, from mostly across the Western United States and even in Texas. This isn't a complete map, but you can see we've been a lot of places throughout the West, and from mountains to prairies to deserts to annual grass areas that are dominated, or things that are dominated by just grasslands. And so anyhow, that's our work. Our work has been patented. The US Patent Court has said that we've done 27 unique and exceptional things in our patent for uplands. And then on riparian areas, we have a patent on the work that we've done there. And I believe the reason we've been able to do these things as such a small company is because we've been able to integrate management that has to be for profit with technology. And so there's very few companies that have that technology, people that could do the GIS, etc., that have any management experience, and vice versa. And so we've also published in international peer-reviewed journals like Ecological Indicators. Our work is basically, what we've done that's made it powerful is that we've integrated different perspectives. Just like if we were all in the room and all looking at something from a different angle, together, if we could communicate, we can describe that thing better and better and better. And we can describe it both by our sight, but from our experiences. And then if we can communicate in a trusted manner, we can know that thing a lot better. So what we've done in rangelands is that we've basically taken near ground high resolution imagery, which its value is that it has 20 million pixels in it. So we have 20 million points of data instead of the normal go out and do a transect and you have 100. And the rangeland is so variable. And the other value of it is that not only is it data rich, but also people can look at a picture and they can understand it. Once we start talking about GIS or machine learning or AI or whatever, people are not going to understand that in general, this general audience. And we need the general audience to understand stuff because we have to get trust. So we start with these high resolution images. Then we mathematically tie that to 1 meter resolution imagery, but it's landscape wide. And so we can take that information and tie it to an aerial photo, so to speak. And then we can tie that information up to satellite, and a satellite that gives us another value. It's coarser in resolution, it's 30 meters, but it basically has been taken every 16 days since 1973. So now we can look at how things changed over time. Then that information can go to an on-the-ground management team that actually has experience down there, and they can give us the most valuable thing in the world, which is the smell test. And so our audience has been these on-the-ground managers over hundreds of projects. Lots of GIS companies, their audience might be a peer-reviewed paper, it might be for a congressman, it might be at some regional scale. But to have people tell us that our stuff is working or not working has been very valuable. So that's what's differentiated. Another thing that's differentiated us. And because all these things come together, all these different perspectives, either very detailed information, the landscape, and going through time every 16 days and back to managers, those all the things that are lacking from one perspective can be overcome from the other perspective with the minimum amount of bias. So to do this in a cartoonish way, the existing method is to go out and throw what I would say is a hula hoop. And you go out and you have these plots, and you go out and you have these plots, and generally these plots cost the BLM, when they contracted, somewhere between $1,000 to $3,000 per plot. And you have this giant landscape, say this is the Nevada Ranch. On the Nevada Ranch, we have about 9 BLM plots that have been irregularly read over the last 40, 50 years. And part of the reason is that it's so costly to go out and do it. And you go out there and you get 100 plot, and in that plot you might have some detailed information. I'm cartoonized. There'll be some black areas, some brown areas, or say there's a unique forb, and then there's a lot of grass, and there's some sagebrush, and there's a bunch of bare ground, and you quantify that, and you get that on those 9 different plots, and you get 100 of them. Our method, because instead of just having those few plots that are kind of scattered out there, our method is that we know that if we're going to correlate to satellite imagery, we've got to teach the satellite in a visual way. So we've learned not only where to put plots so there's not confusion spectrally. It's just like a child. You wouldn't teach a child the color red and blue by having a random plot and then doing a big sample size. You would have an object there that mama says, this is blue, show me blue, then show me green. And so it's a visual activity. So what we do is we take lots of plots, and each one of those plots has 20 million pieces of information in it. And we take them in places that we know are contrasting and comparative. This is one thing or the other. And by that, all of a sudden you start getting some idea of what you're looking at from a landscape perspective. You tie that information to a satellite, and then you can go back in time with very little bias. So then you start filling in the picture, you get more and more definition of what it is that you're looking at. And you can start looking at what was it like before? What was it like before that? What was it like even before that? And so that allows us, because lands change so much just because of the weather, you don't know if you just have a plot, a little tiny plot, one time point in time, what that's telling you. But if you can have tremendous amount of data at a very low cost, and be able to go back and forth in time, you can say, was that changed because of the weather, or was that because of something man-made? So here's the type of projects that we've done. All these things that we've worked on, this is just a partial list, none of which we really knew how to do, was a real instruction. But by having this powerful tool of integrating 4 perspectives, we could start finding the important issues within the remote sensing to diagnose these things. So the type of projects that we've done are, we've done NEPA analysis for land conditions, so the BLM can do an allotment renewal. We've done endangered species habitat, such as identifying sage-grouse habitat over 30 or 40 million acres and tying that to the biological activity of leks and how many birds there are. We've done jumping mouse in New Mexico and riparian areas, et cetera, fisheries, et cetera. We've done water quality. We've correlated our information to water quality that mining companies were worried about that had very rich data pool. Or the information, once you have the basic information, the BLM and the Forest Service has used this for wilderness value analysis, because we know how much of what kind of plant matter is where and how far it is from the water and the steepness, and if there's any physical barriers and the palatability of those forages, we can figure out what the stocking rate is based on either the how wet it is, whether you have live reliable water, or whether you're talking about a species like a horse versus a cow versus a sheep. And then therefore we can find livestock use patterns. So we can see, oh, is there some change because that was something that was closer to water or something like that, or some differences. Our information has been used in fire planning because we can see what the volume and the continuity of fuels are. Grazing management's effects on bare ground, the change in juniper cover over time, or what is the condition of juniper cover. So the 4 bullet points in red here basically are things that have to do, we believe, very directly with soil health, things that we can measure very cheaply over landscapes and tell what's going on with likely whether soil carbon is going one way or another. Bare ground, production, length of green period, residual dry matter and diversity are all 4 key areas in looking at bare ground. Gabe Brown, a friend, would say that is the ground armored, or et cetera, et cetera. So bare ground and productivity and the length of green period is going to tell you whether you're taking in sunlight and water or not. So to get this a little bit, I'm going to take the New Mexico. I'm going to look at a ranch that we looked at there. We looked at a bunch of ranches that had employed grazing and based on holistic principles for at least 10 years. And then we had enough money that we looked at 4 or 5 different ranches and we compared them. But on one of the ranches, I've taken the time for 3 years to go out and do soil sampling on the right-hand side here. On one side of the fence, it's employed management, time, and density principles. And the other side of the fence is basically the standard 50 acres per cow per year. And then another area that's very near there that has had no grazing at all. And here's some results on soil carbon. You can see the continuous grazing had 5.2 tons per acre of soil carbon, whereas the no grazing had more at 6.8, but the management and time and density had 7.4. So not only did it have more tons per acre than even no grazing, you can imagine what the economic difference of that is to have cattle versus no grazing. The next thing I want to show you is that this difference that we see here is after about 10 years, but we think it's really going to start changing now because there's about a 5 times difference in the amount of soil calcium, which is very indicative of how well the soil what's functioning relative to soil microbes. And we have some tentative evidence that shows a tremendous difference in soil fungi in the time managed density. And of course, soil calcium is integral to every part of the cell and cell wall functioning in a plant. It has a tremendous effect on the defensive system, the stomata to regulate drought, etc. And you can see this tells me that good things are really going to start coming. So if you look at the financial parts of comparison between grazing treatments, you look at continuous grazing where the acres per cow per year is 50 versus the management time density. Basically that's varied from about 25 to 32. I put an average of 27. And then let's just say that the pounds of calf are the same. And New Mexico average for percent calves per cow is 88%. This rancher enjoys 97. So his pounds of calf per cow is 440 pounds versus 485 pounds. If you say the current market's $1.40 per pound for a steer calf, the dollars per cow is $616 versus $679. But because the stocking rate's so much different, the gross revenue per acre is $12 versus $25. The cost to do time management density is in troughs and fence and storage tanks and this and that. And that's been about $35 an acre divided by the 30 years that it'll last, adds about $1 or over $1. So anyhow, the difference in gross revenue minus the additional costs is substantially different. The tons of carbon, as we already looked at, is quite a bit different, 2.2 tons, and even greater than total rest. But what's the value of carbon? And we don't know really what the value of carbon is because the markets really haven't been established other than a few. But then you say, and what drove me to even start this was thinking that water security was probably the most important part of our land management, that somewhere around 6 billion people are going to be concerned about their water and it's secure or not. And because bare ground is so related to water infiltration, it has over a 90% correlation in hundreds of studies around the world, that basically what's happened with those ranchers that we studied, they had significantly greater, less bare ground than their neighbors across the fence. And we measured hundreds of miles, thousands of miles, and looked at both sides. And basically their bare ground went down. In the case of the JX ranch, I measured a 4 times increase in rate of water infiltration. And the greater carbon should equal greater water storage. And if he has 2.2 more tons than normal grazing, that's about 7,000 gallons per acre more. And Katie Ziegler has been studying Tom's wells, and it shows that there's some evidence that suggests that his well levels, the water levels are rising. This is switching gears. I want to show Juniper, which is a huge issue. And in Oregon, they estimate there's 28 million additional acres of juniper dominated land since white settlement. And there's an effect when things like that happen. So when you are in phase 1 juniper, which is when it starts crawling out from where it used to live in the rocks and places that didn't burn or places that we didn't graze, there's a big difference between phase 3 when it's out and it has dominant ground cover and it reduces the amount of ground cover in those spaces. In some studies in Utah and Oregon, they've shown a dramatic difference in herbaceous biomass, plant diversity. And the big deal with junipers is that the amount of bare ground and therefore runoff, but the trees, any rainstorm of less than 6/10 of an inch hits the top of those branches and it re-evaporates to the sky, which means that local utility of that water is reduced. So we looked at an area of a
Sorry, I
million
just wanted to
acres.
say, you have a 5 minutes. You just wanted us to give you a heads up.
Oh, thank you. we looked at 1 million acres and we found out how much of it was in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And that was able for them to do planning, and they've basically done treatments on about 100,000 acres. We can make a trade with our urban neighbor folks that are downstream. There's the people from the Altiplano, from the Mongolian highlands, or us Western ranchers. We have all these values and the value of air and water and wildlife. But the question is, how do you?
So we got a technical difficulty, but he probably will jump back on in a moment, thankfully, hopefully. In the meantime, you can put down your questions in the chat bar.
Well, I see we have one question in the chat that we can probably answer while we're waiting on Gregg. Bianca's asking about methodology for what he's talking about. And if you can go to openrangeconsulting.com, and there's a bit more detail about that, but understand that a lot of what they're doing is with the data they're getting and processing is a proprietary process. So I hope that answers your question, Bianca.
And Christina, maybe you know more about this because I know you had a long chat with Gregg. You were saying it's a proprietary process, but what I understand, it's really, and he showed a bit of a picture about that. It's like a specially built camera, right? That goes and out onto a field.
Well, there is the camera, but where the rubber meets the road is the data processing that sort of translates what they get at that local site to an interpretation of the Landsat data. The on-site work, as I understand what Gregg has done, it was to establish the ground truthing of their data processing piece, and so once they had ground truthed, and they may have to do this in different habitats. Now that I'm thinking about it, then they can go back and plug in the values that they've gotten, and their computer takes the Landsat data and just translates the numbers into something that is a more granular than you can get with Landsat.
Right.
Landsat doesn't, as a land manager, Landsat does not give you the detail that you really need to look at the ground and know much. At 30 meters, you can miss a lot. So he's able to get it down to 1 meter, which is phenomenal.
And that really gets at the larger discussion, which is how to measure soil health. And when we were preparing for this webinar, Gregg was saying, well, one of the simplest methods to measure soil health is to look at bare ground. And whether you use his methodology, which is somewhat custom made and technology heavy, but really cool, right? Or whether you use your own tried and true observation based methodology that you've learned in rangeland management studies, it doesn't really matter as long as it gives you the results that you can track over time, and that informs your management, which then results in good management, better grass, better profitability, better soil health. And so that he kind of boiled it down to those very simple sound bites. And I see in the chat box we have Holistic Management International is on, our friends there, and they have a really great case study on their website. And I don't want to put you on the spot, HMI, but since we're just chatting here, would you guys like to talk about the study that you've done with Gregg?
Sure, and actually this is Ann Adams. When he did that study that the Thornburg Foundation and Western Landowners Alliance had done in 2015, that was what this, and then it ended up being also an in practice article, and also in the publication Rangelands. So I just put the link there because there's some really interesting graphics, including there's also a picture of the camera on a stick, as they call it, which is, you know, the big boom that comes off of the ATV that has the camera that is shooting what Gregg was talking about. But below that is some really interesting fence line contrasts that they're showing. You know, here's the ranch boundary, and these average of percent bare ground, you know, was, you know, significantly different, is basically a 27% decrease in bare ground on the well-managed sides versus the ones that weren't. And by doing that comparison on that boom, they were really able to get good data on the distinction between how management was affecting the two sides of the fence. And then there's another picture that shows where there's less bare ground or more bare ground on different sides of the fence. And this is where
So
they're
is-
looking at the JX Ranch in comparison to.
So Christina, he says he can see us all, but you can't see him. We can't see him, I guess.
And
There you are, you're
There
back.
he is.
Yay.
okay, well, I'll just take some questions, I guess.
We've got one question here from someone who isn't able to use a microphone. So here it is. How would the creation of carbon markets impact your work? And are you preparing for this eventuality? So what do you say to that, Gregg?
Yes, I've been preparing for about 25, 30 years. Because the thing that I've been working on is you have to create a trusted scale so that the buyer and the seller can know that they're trading value. And so, for instance, it costs so much to go out and dig a soil pit, and it tells you nothing about any place that's even a foot away. And so without a trusted scale, and the analogy is if you had a cattle scale and it measured in 500-pound increments, and it cost $1,000 an hour to run, and it wasn't precise or accurate, then the guy buying the cattle doesn't know what he's getting. The guy producing it doesn't know if he's getting a fair price. And so the market is there for water security or for carbon. The thing that we've been working on for a long time now is to make sure we have a trusted scale so the buyer and the seller can make a market.
Okay, thanks, Gregg. Sterling, would you like to ask your question? Just unmute yourself and go ahead.
There we go. Okay, Gregg. There has been some resistance among ranchers to the promotion of soil principles. Given your data showing the economic benefits, how can we make the economic case in such a way that the more conservative ranchers will be more receptive?
So that who will be more receptive?
More conservative ranchers who rebel at the notion of
Yeah.
holistic management, they rebel
Yeah.
at the notion of soil health.
I think in economics that I studied in graduate school was that you invest in your best first. You don't go to the salty ground and put your effort and labor there. You go to the best areas. So you don't worry, in my mind, the way to make the market is not to go to the most conservative people. It's to go to the people who have curiosity, who have data, who want to reach out. And that's where I would focus. And that's where I focus my attention for the past 40 or 50 years ranching.
Good answer.
You have a follow-up at all, Sterling?
No, that's fine. That's great. Thank you. Good answer.
Very good. Okay, just noting that Brian Crawford Garrett has posted the direct link to the article that Ann was talking about. And I'm going to move on to a question from Lawrence. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes. Hi, Greg. My name is Lawrence
Hi.
Bagos, and I work with the Western Landowners Alliance. Anyway, I just wanted to know is the type of data that you gather in order to compare it with the satellite data that you have. Do you have to get data from different locations to like in different elevations and different areas to be able to ground truth that the satellite imagery?
Yes, what you have to do is think. So we get so one guy on a four-wheeler or with a drone, but generally four-wheelers are better. They'll get 15 to 20 pictures a day. And because we've solved these, how to define things over tens of millions of acres, we figured out where to take the picture at so that you can make the model that you can. And so the key to making unlike normal scientific method where you're trying to have random samples, you're trying to, like a mother teaching their daughter blue and green, you need to show this is really blue, not purple, not violet, not aqua. This is blue and this is green. And so with this, we take pictures so that we find the contrast. For instance, we'll have a picture where there's a lot of bare ground and then there's not much bare ground, or there's a lot of brush in it, or there's not much brush in it. There's a lot of grass in it. So we have this range of conditions in our imagery. And then in that imagery, the picture, we draw areas and we say, in this picture, this near ground photo, we say, this is bare ground. And it has lots of examples of where bare ground is. And so it classifies it with spectra and says, oh, this is what these guys tell me, this is what bare ground looks like. Now I'll go find it across the entire landscape, or I'll find brush, I'll find mesquite or junipers, or I'll find grass or stuff. And so it's a lot like facial recognition technology, where we take enough pictures of your face and there will be defining characteristics about it that we can find you anywhere you go. And so I don't know if that helps, but we build models that satellites, that imagery, that the way that you see can be extrapolated over time and space. Did that help or not?
Yes. Are you eventually going to be able to extrapolate it for, maybe for a whole state or for a whole Western United States or something like that? Or is that kind of a goal of yours? Or
yeah, we been told by have been talking to people, and they believe that a lot of GIS people don't really work on the ground, and that's where we've worked, and directly with ranchers or BLM or Forest Service folks or wildlife folks. And we have a library of these pictures, thousands and thousands of them, that each one of them has 20 million bits of information in them. And from that, and because we've done so much area, we think that we'll be able to map the entire West and be able to go back 4 or 5 decades in time, and therefore be able to see what's going on. And then we can compare and contrast and be able to see, are we just seeing climate or global warming? And we can tell through decades that you can see the effects, or we can tell, is that a management thing? Is that guy grazing some way different? Or and for instance, in the ranch I was using an example, we can see where somebody farmed probably in the 1910s and 20s and the 1940s. It still shows up, that heavy land disturbance, even though it's been grazed right now for 15 or 20 years. Even the ranch manager, we were able to show him places where there must have been a historic farm of what they used to do is have, just like the Indians, squash and corn and beans. But yes, we hope, and therefore, instead of the 5 to 10 cents an acre, that we'll be able to do it for much, much cheaper.
Wow.
And we're trying to just be
Have you also collected data on public lands?
Yeah, we have, well, yeah, we have all kinds of thousands of miles of Forest Service streamways and land. And like I said, we've done 50 million acres. And if you do that in the West, you're on the public land too. We have tens of millions of acres of public land.
Wow.
What we usually don't include is private land unless they say it's okay to show our data. So we get, if we're ever going to use their land, we get written permission to show their data.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And so I wanted to ask one follow-up, and that is, so once you get the signature of, say, mesquite in New Mexico, is that signature then the same in Texas?
There can be differences because there can be a slight difference in light angle.
Mm-hmm.
There might even be some variation in leaf tone or shape or something, just by local variation.
Okay.
But the answer is generally yes. But because when we present our data, we present it to local people and they say, oh, that looks right or that looks wrong. And then, so we are seeing each other using visible light. And out of the entire electromagnetic spectra, visible light would be an inch on the scale of how much information there is. The rest of the spectra, from ultraviolet to far infrared, would be bigger than your room in length. And so it's so much more robust in describing something. We can measure so many more ways. We can measure the heat coming off of you, or certain points of the heat that will tell us what is how under stress the stomatal openings are, or in your case, your pores are, or something, or the dryness of your skin versus the wetness, and make assumptions to how old you are, or things like that. The descriptive value of taking spectral information, turning it into mathematics, and combining that with the unique human skills to see beauty, to see patterns, the right brain activities. And when you integrate that, the robustness of description is what we've uniquely developed.
Wow. Thank you. Isabel, you had a question?
Yeah, super fascinating. Yeah, my question is a bit more mundane, but I would love for you to give an example, Greg, where you helped a ranch go from losing money to making money, and how you did that.
Yeah, basically, I'm so I use my right brain to look at people and see if they've got fire in their eyes, and therefore they got it in their belly and they want to do shit. And then the next thing I do with those people is I give them good information. And it turned out that if you have financial information and you take this whole list of costs that you have, from how many 5-inch bolts or whatever, the amount of fuel, or your interest costs, or this or that, on a ranch, you find out what are the 1, 2, and 3 highest cost things. And then you try to look for a leverage point to change that. So for instance, in the Intermountain West, I did my thesis on how farming affected the financial efficiency of mountain cattle ranches, and basically found out that somewhere around 60 to 80% of the total costs of running a ranch in the Northwest was producing and feeding hay, and it was highly related to inflation because it was highly related to non-renewable resources. And so what we did was we said, we've got to go to war on feeding hay. And so out of the millions of things that you can do on a ranch each day, we knew the one thing that would allow us to have a job. And so I've made payroll now for 50 years based on identifying those few things that drive the system. And so in that part of the world, so in general, in rangeland, it's the amount of bare ground. You can know all kinds of things about soil microbes and this and that. I have to boil it down to something that is the leverage point that I can measure and I can easily communicate to a broad spectrum of interest. And so that's why one thing we really featured is what's happening to your bare ground. If your bare ground goes down, your infiltration goes up and shit happens. It's called cattle fertility. It's called numbers. It's called the size of antlers. It's the number of bugs. It's called soil carbon. You put water in the ground, and this guy named Al Gore came along. I was working on that we need to worry about water. I believe if I dump some water on the ground versus some carbon, I will get a lot more effect from dumping the water on the ground. And water is directly related to the percent bare ground, and the percent bare ground doesn't change as much as grass plants year to year and this and that. It will be a real harbinger as it moves a little tiny bit. If it moves even 1 or 2%, it has a huge effect on your plant productivity and therefore all the other critters that depend on that, including us.
One quick question I have is, if you don't have more expensive technology to measure in the kind of capability that you're showing that you do, or let's say you do that at some point, but in the meantime, can you observe healthy soil principles that can actually bring you more success on the range?
Yeah, if you look at Gabe has outlined the 5 things, and basically we can cheaply see, is the ground armored, i.e. is there bare ground or not? Does the ground have livestock on it? We can tell through our biosphere analysis because we can see how much production there is through time or the length of green period and how much total amount. And we can see during the winter how much residual bare ground how much residual dry matter you have on top of the ground. And so those are really, I think I got off track from your question, Rob.
I was just saying, how could a rancher observe on his land the 5 healthy soil principles in a way that could be more?
If I'm going to boil it down to one, I would just say, and this is what I got to in the 70s, was just measuring what is the percent bare ground. And all you have to do is walk out there, and every time you take a step and you look towards the horizon, you have a little mark on the end of your boot, or just look at the end of your boot and you say, and you mark on your hand with a pen, and you say, I hit bare ground or I didn't. And then you go, then at some place that you tend to stop and pee or whatever it is, you do that multiple years. The next thing you do that I did was you go to a little drainage way up high, and in the bottom of the drainage way, you see whether you have any little plants starting to come. Because those little drainage ways will be an area that it's not blowing out with some thing of water, but they are an area of moisture accumulation. And if your grazing's right, you'll start seeing little plants coming in there. And it'll start healing the top 1/8 of that little drainage way in the first 3 or 4 years. And then in the next 3 years, it'll start herring over the other 7/8. So your grazing, when your grazing's good, a seed turns to a seedling, and that's magic. And you just go. So the problem with going out and doing some random sample is that our land is so droughty and so tortured by the lack of moisture that you need to put your sampling in areas like a canary in a mine to where you're going to see those little things that are changing. And the chance that you're going to pick that up by going out and doing some hula hoop plot somewhere out on the ranch is almost zero. You will not, and I've put out thousands of them since 1968. So that's the thing about when you have a description of every square meter across your ranch, you will be able to see those places that start changing, and they will show up as green growing material. And you go, man, and in a 10,000 acre pasture, at first it might be 3 acres that starts changing. And then you create what I call power places. And then all of a sudden you got, oh, this thing is going the right direction. And then once you get a toehold, it expands geometrically, assuming God gives you some water.
But thank you very much. We've been, staff have been emailing and texting, and it's stimulating some good discussion internally. So we really appreciate it.
Great. Last thing I'll say is, this is not rocket science. It's unbelievable. Out of the, I don't know, 14 or 15 ranches that I've managed, we've dropped the cost of production by over half. And almost every one of my managers has got a letter saying from the wildlife agencies of awarding them manager of the year or something. And the key to it is that ranching is so fraught with risk that I've never been part of a business that has more fear in it. And one of my jobs has always been to drive out the fear. And so ranchers have production risk, and they have price risk, and they have emotional risk because they're trying to hold a legacy. And when you ask somebody to change, even if it's not rocket science, you're asking them to take on additional risks when they have very little money. And so it's only rational that they don't change. And it's weird when they actually do find somebody who does. But if you could imagine in your jobs, if you didn't know how much money was going to come in, you ran a restaurant, you didn't know whether food was going to show up or not. And then it's your great granddaddy's restaurant, and you're the one that looks like they're going to go out of business operating it. It's paralyzing, even to do these really, really, really simple things. And so I don't dish any ranchers for not changing, but I've found that the ones that do change, I've given talks to hundreds, thousands of people over the last 40 years. And who's ever changed are people that are going out of business within the year or two. They either have more money than they have brains, or they're naturally adaptive people. And so, and that's out of 100 people, that might be 2 or 3. But if we can create new markets for these values because of having an adequate measurement of it, then all of a sudden there's a new revenue source coming into these ranches. And that revenue source will now give them the money to pay the tuition that it takes to change. And if you don't, and then we'll be able to create the mentorship that helps people deal with the fear, because most people have never had the opportunity to change. And if some extension specialist is talking to them about changing, but they've never done it, a rancher can smell that so quickly. This guy's just talking, but he doesn't have skin in the game. So anyhow, hopefully our technology will help create some of these markets, because the number of people who want water security and how valuable it is to the state of New Mexico and the western states and to people in China and all over, the value of cleaning up our air is so great that I think there's now going to be the political will to really work on it. And I'm hoping, and if they put it in the hands of the rancher farmer, shit will happen. Those guys with a little bit of money, they will make things happen. Thanks for your time, guys.
Thank you, Greg. It's wonderful. Isabel, do you have anything you want to close with?
Well, I think we did our announcements while we were waiting. So thank you so much, Greg. That was really fascinating. And we get some acolytes coming in through the chat box. Take a moment to take those in. And thanks all for hanging in there and, sticking it out a little longer.
All right. Thank you. Bye now.
Yeah, we're really grateful, Greg.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Greg.
All righty. Bye now.